sum it up real quick. Could you explain what the Folklife Center is and give a brief summary about it for people who don't really understand it? What type of work do you do there as well?
Thanks for asking. So I work in an office. It's called the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, and we are an office, not a museum. So we're not like a space with galleries that the public can walk into. Instead, we're a research and programming division. So we are involved in research, we're involved in education and programming, and we do this through festivals, through exhibitions, through media projects, but all of our work is really focused in this area of cultural heritage. So we are working in the realm of culture. And I would say that the way in which this relates to public history practice and thinking about history is that culture is really the way in which sort of history in the past is embodied in our actions today, in our relationships, the way we speak, the stories we tell, the celebrations that we observe. These are all examples of how the past and our collective histories shape the way in which we act and behave and interact with one another today. So that's sort of the domain in which we work. The two biggest public-facing initiatives that our office produces are the annual Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which is a big public free event that happens out on the National Mall every summer. And the other major sort of public-facing program that we produce is Smithsonian Folkways Recording, which is a nonprofit record label of the Smithsonian. And just to give you a little context for sort of where our office comes from philosophically, we grow out of the Folklife Festival, which was an event that was started in 1967 and very much as a product of its time. So if you think about what was happening in the 1960s, this is the time when people are questioning and rethinking the nature of American culture and identity. The US is involved in a very unpopular war in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of civil rights activism that is energized at this time. And so the Smithsonian at this moment was trying to think about how as an institution it fit into this changing landscape, and wanted to do something that would demonstrate that the institution could engage with the diversity of American experiences. And so the idea was to produce a major festival during the 4th of July, this important civic event on the American calendar, and to foreground not famous Americans or prominent Americans, but instead focus on grassroots communities and look at how people themselves were expressing what was important to them through their music, through their dance, through their foodways. So that's a little bit about our office and what we do, the scope of what we do. We work internationally and we work nationally, and we also work locally.
Hello? Okay. I have another question as well. I'm also posting it to the chat as well. I was trying to, since you began working at the Folklife Center, what changes have you seen?
What changes? So I have been working here for now 9 years. And I would say that in terms of thinking about history and work around history, my colleagues, many of whom have been working in the office a lot longer than me, and then my predecessors who worked in the office before I did, I think have really been on a very leading edge of thinking about history, thinking about popular history and public history and people's history. Many of the practices that I think a lot of other institutions are thinking about today have been things we've been doing for a long time. So collaboration and reciprocity and research and sharing authority over the stories and the histories that we tell, shared stewardship of collections. So in some ways, some things have not changed. But I would say that the biggest thing has been the way that we have mobilized and thought about how to get content and engage the public online. So using this digital space. I'm sorry, my dog is barking and I'm gonna go just shut him up. Hold on.
Perfect timing. All right, Lola.
That's okay.
I'm back.
I got to ask like 6 questions already, so I only have one more. But it just is what you already kind of answered when you talked about virtual field trips. But so much of the work of Ford's Theater is based on people visiting the actual site for plays and for the museum. So how are you able to kind of achieve the same goals that you had previously set out for your job, and what the goals of the theater during like the COVID-19 crisis?
You know, it's so funny because literally all of us in one day were asked to work and learn in a completely different way. Literally overnight. Like we left on a Friday and that was it. Like you left school. And so we're finding our way as we go, and we're trying to quickly leverage things that we've already had online, if it was like a workshop or a field trip, and to sort of quickly get that out there. But the other part for us as a museum is letting people know what resources that we have. So helping to try and spread the word to teachers and students. And it's not easy at all, either developing the content or getting the word out. So we're really just kind of like trying to do the best we can and work with different departments, and, you know, have the production people work with the history people, and just kind of make it up as we go. But I think that, I mean, it's so early, but I think this is in part of a new reality, because I don't know if when we all go back, if things will ever be exactly like they were. And only time will tell, but I'm sure like all of you in your classes and those of you in your jobs, it's just completely different.
Mm-hmm. But that was my last prepared question. So thank you so much for talking to me and everyone else who got to hear about.
Thank you, Lola. And I'm
yeah.
sorry that your internship was cut short because of all this.
I asked a question. I just wanted to know. Oh, can I ask a question real quick? Hello?
Yep, go ahead, Amora.
Okay. I wanted to know, how can you relate Lincoln's life to the various demographics that you teach? Because like I know how you said like teaching the kids, you like tell them about DC history. Is that the same for everybody, like from young to old, from like teachers to students? Like what do you do for the different people that come in?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that you look at certain universal things that he might have been able to appeal to everybody. And so if you look at a lot of the traits that he had compassion, he had empathy, he had humor, he had intelligence, he had intellectual curiosity, he had an ability to get people to agree on things and work together. So I think all of those qualities kind of transcend age, race, religion, gender, demographic. I think those are sort of like universal ideals that we can all strive for. But I really appreciate your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually have a question as well. Is this audio working fine?
Yep.
Okay. I was wondering to figure out, what was your thought? I want to understand more about why did you choose to, are you choosing to stay for solely Lincoln, or are you choosing to go deeper into another president at some point in time, or is this Lincoln for you as of right now?
Well, the museum I work at is definitely all Lincoln all the time, but I'm certainly interested in a lot of other presidents. And I have to tell Dr. Kim that growing up, I went to Wilson High School in DC. I grew up in DC as well, and I every summer would go to the Folklife Festival. And as you know, the other half of me is a musician, and I got to see some amazing things at the Folklife Festival when I was learning to play the guitar and just getting interested in music. And so I think like the more you can take advantage of, Washington has so much free stuff to offer, and so much culture and museums and things. And it's amazing what you'll stumble across as a 14 or 15-year-old that'll stay with you for the rest of your life. So that doesn't answer your question at all about other presidents, but.
No, it's fine. I was really trying to understand what other interests in history did you have? Like, did you have interest in any other presidents? But that was much better than my previous question. Thank you so much.
Michael, I want you to line up your next best 2 questions for Dr. Kim, and then I'm
Gotcha.
hoping that our guests can tell us about their favorite object. that I put
Favorite
in the chat.
object.
But you ask your questions, and then they can, if there's time, they can get to my object question in the chat room.
Got you. Dr. Kim, are you back with your dog?
Back.
Okay, sweet. I just switched my audio and voice as well. I'm about to post it in the chat so you can see it as well. But just
Your audio is working really well now.
got you. Anyway, I know that you worked in quite a few public history institutions, some at California, and of course here in DC. What one drew you to public history, and also what kind of work that went into it, like from California to here?
Yeah, so my past jobs were in more traditional history settings, in that I worked in a public library space on a photo history project about state and local history out in California. And I also worked in museums, specifically on collection development, so developing the collections for the museums and also working on exhibitions that happen within 4 walls. So before I came to the Smithsonian, my work was actually in much more traditional museum spaces. And there are 2 things that have really interested me and made this just a really great journey for me. And I think one is what your other guest, Mr. Flack, has been talking about. One is just this idea that there are things that you cannot see. There are layers of experience that are not necessarily visible, and it's the job of the historian to uncover and show these layers of history. And I have always found that to be incredibly exciting and intriguing, to think about what are the layers of things, what are the layers of the past that have happened around and in this place that brought us to this moment. So I find that to be really exciting about history and public history work. And then also what's been really important to me and what drew me through the projects that I've worked on in the past have been this idea of the need to document and preserve and interpret a wider diversity and complexity of accounts about the past, right? There are certain experiences and insights and perspectives that we see represented, in our history books and our history text in the newspapers and the media. And then there are a whole bunch of stories that are only marginally touched upon or not told at all. And it has been really important for me and extremely rewarding to play just a small part in being able to help uncover and bring some of these other stories into exhibitions, into media projects. I work in more recent history, so really the 20th century. So I'm not dealing with people from the last century or prior. So I have also the privilege of being able to interview people who themselves have lived through historic events. And I think that's I've really enjoyed that part about public history work, is being able to talk to the witnesses and the contributors to major historic events.
Okay, I have one last question. I already posted it to the chat, just in case. How was your life as the curator at the Folklife Center? How's it changed because of COVID-19? And also, how do you think COVID-19 made the Folklife Center adapt to the realities of the situation?
Yeah, wow, that's a lot and so much. This is I will say an incredible work in progress that we're all embarking on together. I mean, as your other guest has said, we literally all had this crash course in moving everything that we do in the physical world and in person suddenly into this digital distance learning platform. So, I work in a realm that's about culture and community. We do work where we are collaborating directly with people. It's highly social work in many ways. We really like to show up in person for things, and a lot of our events are about public programming that convenes people together, whether to do research or to do programming. So how we will do this in the future, what kinds of concerns and fears and anxieties people are going to have about gathering together, that is all a big question mark. So that's one major thing that I feel like is an unknown. In terms of my work directly, how it's changed, besides just trying to move more things online, you know, a lot of the work that we do also as public historians is we're not just doing the research, we're not just doing the presentation, but we're also doing a lot of behind the scenes, like archiving and processing and production, trying to make sure that the materials that we're working with are preserved, are accessible to the public. And that's actually this season for me, that's what I was really working on. So in some ways my work plan and schedule hasn't changed a lot. I am as you know, because you're helping me with these, I am right now transcribing and editing a whole series of oral histories. I'm working with our media producers to edit some short videos. I'm adding metadata to digital images and sound recordings that go into our archive so that in the future researchers and students like yourselves can find these things. So in some ways, this kind of work can happen in this world we're living in now, where I'm not in an office around other people. Our office, the other thing that's sort of changing for us and that we're trying to respond to is we're trying to produce unplanned content that we haven't been planning to produce. We've worked with so many different communities in the past, and we're trying to connect with them and check in with them and see how they're doing. And so one thing that we're doing is to try to help some communities who really are not highly visible, whose stories aren't really being told as much. We're trying to give them a space to share what's going on in their community. So for instance, we recently touched base with colleagues who work out in the Navajo Nation to do an interview and to share exactly how they are experiencing the restrictions and the distress of what's going on right now, but also how they're really pulling from their cultural resources and community to survive this period of time. I've worked with a number of different migrant agricultural workers out in California, and they were among the first people that I reached out to, and I have some colleagues out there who I'm trying to work with to bring some of the stories of these folks out onto our website, because agricultural workers, as you may know, are considered essential workers. And so under really some very difficult physical conditions, these folks who also have children who are now being homeschooled and are in the house are still having to go out into the fields and work while the rest of us are in our home. So we're just trying to make sure we can get some of these stories out to the public. And that's one way in which my work is directly changed by what's happening now.
I think that's all the time we have. So I would like to thank you personally for coming here and allowing me to do this interview with you. And also thank you to everybody else for just allowing us to have this interview.
Thanks for your questions, Michael and Lola. And if anyone else has additional questions, like Amora dropped in the chat earlier, feel free to ask Mr. Flack or Dr. Kim before we close out. But I am curious about your favorite, as Mr. Hunt asked, about your favorite objects. I saw that you responded in the chat, Sojin, but if you don't mind saying out loud, and for you, Mr. Flack, as well.
Well, I'm jealous of Mr. Flack and the physical collections and the physical space that he gets to work in, because that's actually something material and tangible that you can stand in and touch and feel the history in this different way. Our collection tends not to be about 3D objects, but mainly about recordings. So recordings of people telling stories, of people singing songs and performing, photographs of events. And I think one of the really important collections that we have are recordings and photographs from 1968, and it was for the Poor People's Campaign and March on Washington. And it was this incredible campaign which happened shortly after. It had been initiated by Martin Luther King, but who had been assassinated before he could actually participate and organize the event. But it was this mobilization of folks from around the country of different backgrounds, and it really was about bringing people together to address issues of economic inequality and call for the government to respond directly through policy to these economic disparities. And so this mass group of caravans came from around the country and convened in DC out on the National Mall and built a temporary space called Resurrection City, And among the things that they also did there was to create a space for sharing culture, sharing music, sharing songs, sharing stories among one another, from the Mexican Americans who came from the Southwest to Native American communities to local African American communities. So it was a really interesting space that was created, and we have these sound recordings from that time period, and I love those.
And I would say probably my favorite object. We have some objects. We don't have a ton of objects. Certainly not like the Smithsonian, but there's a little small sword that belonged to Abraham Lincoln's son Tad, and I think it's a really interesting entry point into talking with students about the kind of father that Abraham Lincoln was, because he loved for his kids to play and have fun, and he'd like to get down on the floor and wrestle with them, and he allowed them to dress up and pretend that they were Civil War soldiers, and they'd throw stuff off the roof at people who were walking up to the White House, and it just sort of separates Lincoln as the guy in Lincoln Memorial to more like Lincoln as just a normal dad at home. So that's probably my favorite object. But my other favorite object in the neighborhood is in the Smithsonian, and it's when you walk in the entrance on Constitution Avenue and you turn immediately to the left. There's a glass case there, and there's an electric guitar in there. It's a Fender Telecaster that was given to the Smithsonian by a guitarist named Steve Cropper, who's one of my all-time favorites. And he's from Memphis, Tennessee, and he was 25% of a band called Booker T and the MGs, who were the backing band for some of the greatest soul music in American history. And what was interesting about Booker T and the MGs is that they really started in high school together, and they were a biracial band. There was 2 white guys and 2 black guys, and they made the best soul music that anybody's ever made. And they played on all of Otis Redding's songs. They played on Sam and Dave, Eddie Floyd. I mean, hundreds of hits that you've heard. So I loved just going to see that guitar and imagining Steve Cropper playing it.
Well, thank you both for those for joining us and for those wonderful responses. I'm curious, as you were just talking about the nature of the Folklife Centers, the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage collection, and a lot of it being recording, a lot of it not being, material, culture in that way. I was curious, what are some of the potential benefits for the Folklife Center, given the fact that maybe this is a moment in which a lot of things can be shared more widely, since you have so many people engaging in online learning and looking to places like the Smithsonian and other places of institutions of public history for engaging students in distance learning right now.
Right, thanks. Well, I mean, I would say because a lot of them are recordings, it doesn't mean that a lot of them are digitized. So, but that actually has been a big push across the whole Smithsonian, is to digitize our analog collections so that people can see, images, digital surrogates, right, of all the paintings in the art museums. And similarly for us, I mean, we have recorded on all sorts of recording technology that you guys have probably never seen before. And so our big challenge has been to transfer this old tape, these old technologies, and digitize them so that they can actually be accessed online. And we had made a good dent in it. And so that's what we're trying to do exactly that, Max, is to think about ways that we can produce these and share them and let people know that they're here in our collection. And thinking about DC stuff as well, I mean, we work internationally and nationally, but we have just the most amazing collection of things that reflect DC communities and experiences and artists. And that's one thing that I've been really, really interested in, is trying to figure out ways to make sure we can get that up and out to the public so that local folks know that the Smithsonian is a resource for local history.
I have another question, but definitely, as I mentioned before, if any of you all have questions, feel free to shout them out before we close out. But I'm curious for a question to the two of you. there's no doubt that is definitely being, lost at the moment in not being able to come visit, Ford's Theater, not being able to, come to the Folklife Festival, given the current, situation. But what do you think are some of or maybe not what do you think, what do you hope are some of the lessons that not just, specifically the Folklife Center or Ford's Theater, but kind of the field of public history, institutions of public history. What do you hope are some of the lessons that they take from this crisis?
I would say one of the things that I hope is, I mean, we're all communicating using these new technologies. I hope that we record some of this and save this, because in 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years, we're going to look back and say, what was life like during this completely unexpected, scary time? Similarly, we'd like to get oral history accounts of people who were in Ford's Theater when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And it's sort of hard to do. There was a finite number of people, and then they were recorded over time. And as Dr. Kim knows a lot better than I do, when you interview people 10 or 20 years after something happens, their memories change, and sort of the historical accuracy might not be there as if you recorded them in real time. So one of the things that I really hope is that everywhere, that people are just documenting what their life is like right now, just regular people. That's what I would hope.
That's so important. That is, and all of you really should be doing that. It's true. Having a record of this from many different perspectives and vantage points is super important. I mean, I think we all knew, whether we're museums or historic sites, we all knew that our largest public potentially was actually not the public that physically visited us, right? You can only get a certain amount of physical visitors anywhere. And so we always realized the potential of the web and online audiences to be much larger. But I think it wasn't until this moment that we really began to hustle very hard to figure out what that really meant and how we would engage people in an effective and efficient way. So I think hopefully we are learning, and we will figure out better ways to do this and how to be more nimble and how to respond. In general, I sort of hope philosophically, we now know really irrefutably that we are all connected. And so I think in terms of thinking about history, I hope that we move forward really thinking about these webs of connection that tie us all and our experiences together.